Hey guys, Miss Watson here. I wanted to start creating some homework videos to try to mimic what we would typically do in class in person of going over some homework questions. So, what I'm doing is what you see here is the homework review form that I included in yesterday, Monday's post, and asked you to fill out, right? So, posted the key here and then asked you to choose between three options for each question, and then left a spot down here for general comments. So you guys understand what I see in the responses. So far I've got 18. Um, I recognize more may come in after this, but I want to try to post these videos so that you have them the morning after. Um, so these are the responses I got. And so by question, what I'm looking at here is um, where does everybody kind of stand, right? So number one looks fairly decent, just percentage wise, right? What I'm really looking for is a blue of at least 50%. Okay, and so first one I see here at three, looks like we're struggling on three a little bit. Four gets better, five gets better, and then six starts going down. Um, seven and eight, struggling a little bit. And then I see your comments here. Okay. And this stuff is going to help me determine what I should go over in this video. And so that's what we're going to do here. Okay. So I wanted you to see that so you understand that this is extremely helpful for me in a really nice way, excuse me, to get some feedback for you guys. So um, I hope it doesn't take you too long to do. You can check your answers and then give me some direct feedback. So now what I want to do is go over a couple of these problems, okay, and then answer some of those questions. So the first one I want to go over is number three. And really what I'm going to do here, guys, is I'm just going to walk through how I would do this problem um, and hope that that answers some questions since now you'll have the work in addition to the answer itself. Okay, so instructions here are multiply, divide, state any restrictions. So first thing is we're multiplying, so I don't need to flip the second term. So first step is always just factor. And the reason why is we want to factor because if we have common factors, we can eliminate those. And that gives us smaller numbers to work with. If we were to multiply out first, we would still have to factor afterwards to eliminate common factors. But it becomes a little harder because the numbers we're working with are bigger. And so that's why I like to factor first when we're dealing with binomials and trinomials, because I think because you're by default simplifying, it makes it a little more straightforward. So factor top and bottom, because what you're trying to do is you're trying to find common factors between the numerator and the denominator. So look for GCFs on these. So I'm going to take out a 2 on top, leaves me with x plus 6. On bottom, I'm going to take out a 3, leaves me with x minus 3. The second term, I'm going to take out a 2, leaves me with 3 minus x. And on the bottom, there's nothing to take out, so I leave it as 3x plus 8. Now, the trick on this one was something that you saw a couple times in the video notes. These two terms look awfully similar, but not the same. And so what we learned through the video notes was this, 3 minus x over x minus 3. We learned what you could do, and I'll show it here, is let's just take out, say, a negative 1 on top. So we take out or factor out a negative 1. That leaves us with negative 3 plus x. And the bottom we leave as x minus 3. Okay, so we're factoring out a negative 1. And I could have done it on bottom, but I just decided to do on top. And the reason why that's super helpful is now look what happens. Negative 3 plus x is the same as x minus 3. Yes, they're flipped, but with addition, 2 plus 3 is the same as 3 plus 2. So those are the same. Those are common factors. And so what that does is that leaves us with negative 1. Okay, so if we do that, let's see what we're left with. Everything else, so we can think of it as cancel this out and this out because it becomes negative 1 from my work right there. So then I'm left with, so I'm going to kind of multiply everything left on top. I have a 2 and a 2, so I have 4 times x plus 6. On the bottom, I have 3 times 3x plus 8. And then that negative 1, I can kind of put anywhere, okay, top or bottom. I'm just going to put it on the top because that's where I had it, it's where I factored out the negative 1 on my work on the side. So that then becomes, I'm going to distribute that negative 1 to the 4. So just negative 4x plus 6 over 3 times 3x plus 8. And that is my final answer. Now, your answer might look slightly different, but still be correct if you put the negative 1 on bottom. So instead, you have negative 3 on bottom instead of positive 3. You could have put the negative in front of the fraction. You could have distributed the negative. There's a couple different variations. Okay, so if you're not sure if yours is right, send me a quick note or post it on Classroom for me to see, and I can verify for you. Okay, restrictions. This was kind of a popular question. Restrictions, you want to base off of um, denominators. Okay, and so what you do is you look at every denominator. And you want to look at the factored form. And the reason why you want to look at the factored form is a restriction is any value that makes the denominator equal 0. Okay, so you want to look at the factored form and set equal to 0. So what I'm going to actually do here is take anytime I have a variable. So this and this, I'm going to set those equal to 0. So I'm going to say x minus 3 equals 0, and I get x equals 3. And then I'm going to set 3x plus 8 equal to 0. I'm going to x equals negative 8 over 3. So my restrictions are x cannot equal 3 and negative 8 over 3. And that's all you need to do for restrictions. Okay. All right, let's move on to number 6 was the next one. Okay, so first thing you want to notice is that this is division, so you want to flip it. Okay, so I'm just going to rewrite it so you can see what I mean by flip it. And you flip the second term because when you divide by something, it's the same as multiplying by the reciprocal. Okay, you don't want to flip both terms, you only want to flip the second term. Okay, now let's factor. Okay, so just so you know, what I did right here is I flipped it so that I can multiply with the reciprocal. All right, factor everything you can so that we can see if there's any common factors that we can cancel out. So first term, the top is going to factor 2y minus 3 times y minus 2. The bottom stays as y to the third. Second term, 4y squared stays as is. Bottom factor is 2y plus 5 times y minus 2. Okay, so again, the reason why we factor is now we can simplify. So let's cancel any common factors. We have a y plus 2 and a y plus 2. Let's also notice that we have a y squared on top. That's going to cancel out with a y to the third and leave just a y on bottom. Okay, so now what are we left with? Let's see, on top we have a 4 and a y minus 3. And bottom we have a y and a y plus 5. And then how do you know you're done? You look back at it. Is there anything else that can be factored? No. Are there any factors that be canceled out? No. That tells us we're done. Okay, and the restrictions, again, you want to set anything that is in the denominator equal to 0. So for restrictions, I'm looking here and I'm looking here because I like to look at the factored form. So if I set all those equal to 0, my restrictions are going to be x cannot equal 0, negative 5, and 2. Okay, all right, let's continue on to number 7. So this one gets a little trickier because you have to factor when a is not equal to 1. Okay, so let's start. This is multiplication, so we don't need to flip anything. So this is really kind of factoring. All right, so let's first factor. Well, there's 3 different things here to factor, and that may be why this one caused some headaches for you guys. I'm going to call this, well, so I'll just write it out. Let's do factor 6c squared plus 13c minus 63. So you're looking for two numbers that multiply to 6 times negative 63, which is negative 378, and add to b, which is 13. Okay, and if you recall from factoring, you just got to play around with this a little bit. I take my calculator out. I start taking 378, dividing it by, figure out the multiples, or I'm sorry, the factors of 378. Okay, you end up getting negative 14 and 27. All right, I'm going to box method this. So in the box method, the first and the last term stay the same. The middle term is split into the two numbers that I found. So negative 14c and positive 27c. Okay, now I'm going to take the GCF of each row and each column. So the GCF of 6c squared and negative 14c, this is going to be 2c. Underneath it, GCF is positive 9. The columns GCF is going to be 3c, and the second column, remember, if the first term is negative, you make it a negative, and it's going to be negative 7. Okay, so then I know that this is what the numerator in the first term factors to. Okay, now let's factor the bottom term in the denominator in the first term. So now we're factoring this. I'm going to go through the same steps. A times c is 63. I'm sorry, 42. B is negative 17. So two numbers are multiplied to 42 and added negative 17 are going to be negative 3 and negative 14. I will box method this again. You don't have to use a box method, but that's what I kind of prefer to use most of the time. So first term, 6c squared. Last term is 7, stay the same. Middle term splits into the two numbers you found. So negative 3c, negative 14c. All right, take the GCF of each row and each column. Top row GCF is 3c. The bottom, the first number is negative, so I'm going to take out a negative. GCF is 7. First column, GCF is going to be 2c. Second column is negative, and its GCF is just 1. So here's how that factors. Okay, and now last, we're going to factor the numerator of the second term. All right, a times c is 2 times 4, which is 8. B is negative 9. So two numbers are multiplied to 8 and add to negative 9. Negative 8 and negative 1. Okay. This way I will do not with the box method, just for those of you that want to see it the other way. So first term stays the same. Second term splits into 8c minus 1c. Last term stays the same. And then I'm going to group and factor out the GCF. So I'm going to have 2c on the outside, left with c plus 4. I'm just checking something. Actually, this should be a negative 8. That's my fault. I think I dropped the negative there. So let me just correct that, which means that this is a c minus 4. Okay, and then the second term, I'm going to take out a negative 1, and that leaves me with c minus 4. You want those two terms to be the same. They are. So now you kind of do what's called reverse distribution. You take what's on the outside, so 2c minus 1, multiply it by the binomial that repeats, which is c minus 4. So now I've just factored that trinomial as well. Okay, that's obviously the huge bulk of the work. All right, so now we have those three factored. So I'm going to rewrite this. with now in factored form. So I have first term is now 2c plus 9 times 3c minus 7. Denominator is 3c minus 7 times 2c minus 1 times numerator on the second term is 2c minus 1 times c minus 4. Denominator, I need to take out a GCF, which is going to be 6. So take out a 6. I'm left with 2c plus 9. All right, cancel out. And this is why we factor first, because it enables us to cancel out common factors. So you have a 2c plus 9, 2c plus 9. 3c minus 7, 3c minus 7. 2c minus 1, 2c minus 1. Excellent. What am I left with? C minus 4 over 6. So that, guys, is definitely one of the harder problems just because there's 3 decent factoring activities in that one. Okay. And finally, the last one I'm just going to walk through as well. There's only, actually, it's not as bad with factoring on this one. Now remember, this is division, so you got to flip it. So really what you're doing instead of dividing is you're multiplying by the reciprocal. Okay, so let's start taking out GCFs. We can further factor the denominator in the second term. Okay, and now let's cancel. W plus 1, W plus 1, W plus 1, W plus 1. Okay, and that leaves us with 2 times 12 on top, which is 24. And on bottom, 4 times W plus 2. You can simplify 24 and 4 because that just becomes 6. So you have 6 on top divided by W plus 2. Okay. Lastly, just wanted to go over a couple questions really quick that you guys had. So these were the questions. Let me just copy and paste these in here. Okay, so just to clarify, restrictions are the opposite of the factor you crossed off. So if there were 2x minus 6, you would cross those off, and the restriction would be x cannot equal 6. This is correct. Second question, do we just multiply out if there are 1 or no factors? If I'm understanding correctly, it's if there's no factors, you need to multiply out. You do not need to multiply out unless, no, multiplication, division, you don't need to multiply it out. So, don't need to in order to cancel out. Meaning, notice my final answers here, guys. Like here in number 6, I left it in factored form. I don't need to multiply that out. Okay. Now, whoever asked this question, if I'm not using the correct example, please let me know, and I can give a better answer. All right. Next question: do restrictions always come from the factored version? Yes, that's the easiest one because remember, restrictions are where you're setting the denominator to equal to 0. That's easiest to do when you're ready in factored format. Okay. Is it easier to factor first and then multiply, or vice versa? I'm going to say factor first. You'll be dealing with smaller numbers, and that's super important if you're going to have to factor large numbers. How do you combine terms that may still have variables and exponents, and how do these simplify? So in order to combine like terms, needs to have the same variable and same degree. So they both need to be, say, for example, x, and both need to the power of 2, or both be x to the power of 3. And so if you're asking this, these equal 2 plus 3, so this is going to be 5x squared, versus 2x squared times 3x squared. This is property of exponents. You do 2 times 3, which is 6. X squared times x squared, you add the exponents. So that's the difference there. Next question, how do you find restrictions? Restrictions are, again, set denominator equal to 0. And solve. And if the numerator and denominator can be multiplied into dividing rational expressions. Yes, you want to, so in dividing, you actually want to multiply by the reciprocal. So that should be the first thing you look at to make sure you don't miss that. All right, last question. Do you need to put the equation in factor form, or you can just leave it as is? So you want to factor first to simplify. So to cancel out common factors. And then your final answer can be left in factored form. You don't need to go the extra step and multiply it out again. Okay, guys, I hope that was helpful. That was probably longer than I intended it to be, but I know that this can be a little bit challenging, especially with all the factoring that's involved. So hope that was helpful. Thanks, guys.